Dr. Shirin Ebadi was one of Iran's first female judges before being dismissed after the 1979 revolution. She went on to defend dissidents as a lawyer, was imprisoned herself.
The Norwegian Nobel Committee has decided to award the Nobel Peace Prize for 2003 to Shirin Ebadi for her efforts for democracy and human rights.
Today, she lives in exile in the United Kingdom, one of the most respected voices for democracy and human rights in Iran. After once believing in reform, she now insists the constitution itself makes reform impossible, and that only regime change can bring democracy. But she also rejects foreign intervention and violence. So how does she see change coming?
But over these 46 years, we have seen the opposite. That is, the Iranian government imprisons innocent people, indeed, takes them hostage to extort the West. And how easily Western governments pay ransom. You saw how Obama sent a plane of cash. You saw how Britain, in exchange for the release of several innocent people who had British nationality, gave ransom so that they could be freed.
بیگناهی که تابعیت انگلیس رو داشتن برای اینکه آزاد بشن چطور باج دادن.
You saw how the Iranian terrorist diplomat who had been sentenced to 20 years in prison was released. You saw how Hamid Nouri was released.
I'm Negar Moshahedi, and this is Eye for Iran, taking you beyond the headlines. Dr. Shirin Ebadi joins us now on Eye for Iran. It's an honor to have you on, Dr. Ebadi. I wanted to start off with your own personal story and for our audience to get to know you better. You once supported the revolution. You were one of the first female judges, a highly accomplished human rights lawyer. When you look back at that time, when did you know that the tide had turned on the revolution? I just finished reading your biography here, Iran Awakening, an incredible book that I highly recommend. And there's this one scene in the book where you describe, the jubilation at the start of the revolution. And you're at the Ministry of Justice's office. You were working and you walked into the office of Bani Sadr. You thought that he would receive you with such pride and joy to see this female judge, joining the ranks of the revolution. But instead, he told you to cover up. Describe that moment to us, set the stage and tell us really when did you understand that the tide had turned on the revolution, because just last week in our last episode, I spoke with Professor Abbas Milani, world-renowned historian and scholar on Iran, and he described the Islamic Republic of Iran as a system that has tried to engineer a new man and a new woman.
First of all, I'd like to add that this is my first book. My second book, in which I wrote about the reasons why I left Iran and the fate of Iran today, I wrote in another book titled Until We Are Free.
امروز ایران رو در کتاب دیگری نوشتم به نام Until We Are Free. و ما در مورد آقای بنی صدر.
But about Mr. Bani Sadr in the book Iran Awakening, whom you've asked about, I must say that it was not Bani Sadr the president. It was the brother of the president, the first president, who at the time ran the judiciary. He headed the judiciary. When he told me this, he said, "Put on your headscarf, even if it's not in your belief, as a sign of respect as someone who has come as a guest to our home," by which he meant Khomeini's. I told him, "Why are you encouraging me to be hypocritical and pretend?"
من خیلی زود فهمیدم
I realized very quickly that all the things Khomeini was saying were lies and meant for deception. And for that reason, from the very first months, I separated my path. Articles that I wrote at the very beginning of the revolution, given that during the first year of the revolution, there was more freedom. I was able to write articles and they were published, but that very moment was the reason that after I left the judiciary and wanted to obtain my law license, they did not give me a license for 7 years and kept me waiting because of the articles that I had written.
و من رو معطل کردن به خاطر مقالاتی که نوشته بودم. به هر حال متاسفانه
In any case, unfortunately, the Islamic Republic sought to use women as slaves, although women resisted too, and because of their resistance, the Islamic Republic was not able to shape the kind of woman it desired according to its own ideology. Still, as much as it could, it tried to impose its culture on the women of Iran through unjust laws.
ولیکن تا میتوانست از طریق قوانین غیرعادلانه سعی کرد فرهنگ خودش رو بر زنان ایران تحمیل بکنه.
I wanted to ask Dr. Ebadi, was there a specific moment that stands out to you where you knew that the revolution had been stolen from people like you?
اولین برخورد من با اینکه خمینی آدم دروغگویی است و انقلاب اون چیزی نبود که من میخواستم.
My first encounter with Khomeini being a liar and the revolution not being what I wanted was on March 8, 1979. I remember listening to the radio news. There was an interview with Mr. Eshraghi, the son-in-law of the Imam, and he quoted Khomeini as saying that women working in government offices and state-owned companies must wear the hijab, and without hijab, no one would be allowed in.
خمینی نقل کرد که خمینی معتقد است زنانی که در ادارات دولتی و شرکت‌های دولتی کار می‌کنند بایستی حجاب داشته باشند و بدون حجاب کسی رو راه نمیدیم. این اونجا بود که من فهمیدم.
That was when I realized that Khomeini did not stand by the things he had said. He had lied. After that, one discriminatory law after another was passed against women, and the situation of women became much worse than before. It meant that we even lost the rights we had won.
بدتر از سابق کرد. یعنی ما حقوقی هم که به دست آورده بودیم از دست دادیم.
You know, it's fascinating for me as somebody who is Iranian, of Iranian origin, as somebody who studies Iran, that you have pretty much lived through every political change in modern Iranian history, from the time of the Shah to the revolution to calling for reform and now calling for a complete regime change. Dr. Ebadi, you were once a believer in reform. Was there a specific moment or a case or an experience in your own life that convinced you that that reform was dead, that the system couldn't simply be changed or reformed that way? Tell us.
مدافع حقوق بشر هستم و طبیعتاً خواهان تغییر شرایط ایران.
I'm a defender of human rights and naturally sought peaceful change in Iran. That's why when Khatami was elected, I felt perhaps his words could be trusted and maybe reforms could improve conditions without bloodshed or heavy costs. But I grew more hopeless day by day, and my despair came after the events of July 9th, 1999. That's when the Tehran University student dormitory was attacked and a young man named Izzat Ebrahim Nejad was killed. I was Izzat Ebrahimi-Nejad's lawyer, and I saw and I had information in this regard about what a tragedy had occurred. We expected Khatami and the reformist government to take the student side, but unfortunately, we saw that many students were being arrested without any justice being carried out as to why that tragedy had been brought upon the students.
دستگیر شدن بدون اینکه عدالتی اجرا بشه که چرا اون فاجعه رو برای دانشجوها پیش آوردن. اونجا بود که من فکر کردم دیگه هیچ
And that was when I thought nothing could be done any longer. Many more events after only strengthened this belief. I hope you will read Until We're Free to understand what events took place.
Until We Are Free رو بخونید تا بدانید که چه اتفاقایی افتاده.
I definitely will, and it's such a tragic and personal experience for you that led you to have that change. But some critics might say that, you know, of course you've made your point powerfully, but some critics might say many Iranians still remember that life in many ways was different under Khatami than, for example, if you compare it to Ahmadinejad, and that it could get worse without that reform as well. If reform couldn't win, did it at least create some meaningful differences in people's daily lives in terms of integration with the rest of society and some form of liberties that, again, different under Khatami than Ahmadinejad, for example? And if reform is structurally impossible, what is the first step in a nonviolent strategy that could force change then? You know, not an aspiration, but an actionable step here.
برای این کار اول از همه قانون اساسی باید عوض بشه. من به عنوان یک
For this to happen, first of all, the constitution must be changed. As a lawyer, I only look at the laws. And based on the constitution, there are principles that the constitution itself has stipulated are unchangeable forever.
تماما از این اصول
All our problems stem entirely from these principles. One of these principles is that all laws must be based on Islamic criteria. Another principle is that the ones who determine this are 6 jurists of the Guardian Council who are directly appointed by the supreme leader, the Wali Faqih.
ولی فقیه و اختیاراتش جزء اصولی است که غیر قابل تغییره.
The Wali Faqih's powers are among the principles that are unchangeable. In my view, the current ruling body must be deposed. This means that in reality, an overthrow must take place. I hope this overthrow will happen without a heavy price and in a short time.
و بعد قوانین دیگر رو بر اون مبنا ما بتوانیم تغییر بدیم و تا زمانی که این قانون اساسی و این ساختار سیاسی بر اساس قانون اساسی فعلی ما داریم هیچ کاری نمیشه.
But how do we get there? I mean, obviously, the system doesn't appear to change it itself. And as you said, reform is dead. You're calling for regime change. You reject violence. You reject foreign intervention and reform as well. So many people want to know, like, what is the actual sequence of events that would take us to this new constitution and to, for example, a UN-supervised referendum that you've called for? So how do you get there with the options that are in place for Iranian people?
به نظر من هیئت حاکمه فعلی بایستی برکنار بشه، یعنی در حقیقت براندازی صورت بگیره و امیدوارم که این براندازی کم هزینه و کوتاه مدت باشه و برای رسیدن به این آرزو
To achieve that, there is no other way except for the people inside Iran to take to the streets and with one voice say they don't want this government, stop working, and then this ruling system will become paralyzed, and through people's resistance, it collapses. Then the people who brought down this government can easily establish their desired ruling system through a referendum. In such a situation, that is, when a government falls and is left without one, the United Nations can intervene, sending representatives to oversee the transitional period and help uphold a fair and proper referendum.
دولتی سقوط میکنه و کشوری حکومتی نداره، سازمان ملل میتواند دخالت بکنه و نمایندگانی بفرسته که هم نظارت بکنن برای دوران گذار و کمک بکنن برای برگزاری یک رفراندوم عادلانه و درست.
You talked about unity and you talked about Iranian people rising up. So then I'm curious, what are your thoughts on Western powers' policies right now towards Iran? With the E3 snapback coming into place, the deadline, the expiration deadline, and most importantly, maximum pressure that's coming from the Trump administration, right? Because maximum pressure is obviously increasing sanctions. It's meant to be targeted, but at the same time, you have the secondary effect that overall the people of Iran will be impacted by this. And some critics argue that those types of sanctions can actually empower the IRGC in some ways because it will then force the government into going through illicit networks and shadow fleets, etc., that only empowers the IRGC. And some argue that rather than isolation and sanctions, that engagement can help empower Iranians through, for example, private sector jobs, investments, foreign investments, and integration into the global economy, which would essentially, they argue, reduce your reliance on the state. So why reject that path? And we've seen, for example, I was just reading a Washington Post article that independent platforms have been crushed, like Divar, which is one of the leading classified apps used by nearly half the population in Iran. The IRGC blocked it and forced out its founder. So what are your thoughts then on U.S. policy, for example, the Europeans' maximum pressure? So basically, I want to ask, how can Iranians get to the streets and rise to power when they're coming from a position of weakness and not strength?
البته که سیاست‌های آمریکا به طور کلی
Of course, US policies and those of Western governments in general will have an impact, but the final and ultimate impact lies with the people of Iran. That means it is the people of Iran who, in the end, must change the destiny of their country in the way that they wish. You see, as long as people submit to oppression, despite their dissatisfaction, and in other words, remain in the so-called grey state, which now the grey stratum is gradually breaking away towards those who believe in overthrowing this regime. It's only under these circumstances that something good will happen.
فقط در این صورته که اتفاق نیکی میفته و من تکرار میکنم مردم
I repeat, people are dissatisfied. They've gradually realized that they must move beyond staying at home, grumbling and complaining, and instead display their protest in the streets to the government and to the world. And now we are seeing protests breaking out on the streets over electricity and water shortages. Our streets must be occupied by the people again. I know this may come at a price, but living under the rule of this government is even more costly for the people. Even ordinary life, water, electricity, and gas has been withheld from the people. While we are sitting on a sea of oil, we are facing shortages, or as the government calls it, facing an imbalance of electricity and gas. What kind of government is this? It has ruled for 46 years and has destroyed Iran.
دریایی از نفت خوابیدیم با کمبود و به قول حکومت با ناترازی برق و گاز مواجهیم. این چه حکومتی است؟ 46 سال حکومت کردن، ایران رو نابود کردن.
And how can the international community then help the Iranians to get there when they're in such a situation? According to human rights organizations, in the past year, there's been over 1,000 executions. How can the international community or policies being set up? As a human rights lawyer, how can people help Iran get there? I mean, right now, it seems that the world is so focused then on the nuclear negotiations and on the nuclear front. And you've said before that possibly the nuclear negotiations are often a smokescreen, that while the governments debate all these issues, people are suffering, people are hurting in Iran. From an international perspective, it seems that the Iran news is always the nuclear. But then for us Iranians, it's all about human rights and the water shortages and, the electricity shortages and everything that's going on in Iran. How can the international community help people get there then with the policies that are in place that, again, focus on the nuclear negotiations and have sanctions that ultimately have the secondary effect, even targeted, of hurting Iranian people as well?
من همواره گفتم
I've always said
حکومت‌های
Western governments that claim they respect human rights must also talk about human rights violations in all dealings and meetings they have with the leaders of the Islamic Republic. But over these 46 years, we have seen the opposite. That is, the Iranian government imprisons innocent people, indeed, takes them hostage to extort the West.
اما طی این 46 سال ما عکسش رو دیدیم. یعنی دولت ایران عده‌ای بیگناه رو زندانی و بلکه گروگان میگیره برای اینکه از غرب باج بخواد.
And how easily Western governments pay ransom. You saw how Obama sent a plane of cash. You saw how Britain, in exchange for the release of several innocent people who had British nationality, gave ransom so that they could be freed.
چند نفر بیگناهی که تابعیت انگلیس رو داشتن برای اینکه آزاد بشن چطور باج دادن؟ دیدید که دیپلمات تروریست ایرانی
You saw how the Iranian terrorist diplomat who had been sentenced to 20 years in prison was released. You saw how Hamid Nouri was released. These are ransoms given to a terrorist and terror-filled government. This behavior has been wrong, and we have always objected. I hope that one day Western governments realize that they must respect the human rights situation in Iran. It must matter to them. And if they deal or negotiate with a criminal government like Iran, they must also talk about human rights issues. And it must be at the top of the matters they ask the government to improve.
باید راجع به مسائل حقوق بشر هم حرف بزنن و در رأس مسائلی باشه که از دولت بخواهند اون رو بهبود ببخشه.
And why do you suppose they haven't? What are the practical mechanisms that we can suggest or put in place to make that happen, other than rhetoric?
بایستی دولت‌های غربی تحت فشار قرار بگیرن. چگونه؟ از طریق مردم خودشون. و همین دلیله که وظیفه
Western governments must be put on pressure. How? Through their own people. That is why the main duty of human rights activists, especially those outside of Iran, is to inform, to speak out, and to raise awareness in Western civil society. We know that, for example, France or Britain, after all, they have democracies and are elected by the people's vote. So the voters must be made aware to elect those who care about humanity. In my view, the most important way to do this is raising awareness. And in this regard, both human rights defenders and media have a duty. The media must echo the voice of the defenseless people of Iran to the world and show what Iranians are enduring.
وظیفه دارن و هم رسانه ها بایستی صدای مردم بیپناه ایران رو به جهان منعکس کنن و بگن که در ایران مردم چه میکشن.
I'm curious, Dr. Ebadi, you spoke recently via video conference in Munich. Tell us about how that all started. Did you reach out to the team of the Prince Reza Pahlavi? Did they reach out to you? Tell us more about that. I'm just curious.
من در کنفرانس مونیخ نبودم.
I was not at the Munich conference. I only sent a message, and in that message, I repeated what I've always said. I'm not a monarchist, nor am I a Republican. I'm for Iran. My wish is to live in a homeland that is democratic and secular. That is exactly what the people of Iran want. And
یعنی
this will
همه چیز
not be
به هم
possible
باخته
unless
و این
Iranians
ممکن
unite.
نیست مگر اینکه ایرانی ها با هم متحد بشن اختلافاتی که
The
سالیان سال
disputes that
این گونه
for
با
many
هم داشتن
years they
سر
pointlessly
مسائل
had with each other
سیاسی
over
با هم
minor
کنار
issues must
بگذارن
be set
و
aside. They
به
must form
ائتلاف
a
کنن با
coalition
هم
with each other and help
کمک
so that
کنن
an overthrow
تا
can happen.
براندازی
Then, at
دفترهای
the ballot
صندوق
box
رأی
during the
لوازم
referendum, it will
رفراندوم
be
مشخص
determined what
کنن
Iran's
که
political system
سیستم
will be in the future.
سیاسی
My
ایران
message to the
در
people has
آینده چه
always been
خواهد بود
unity because I know that
همواره
unity is our key
پیام
to
من
victory.
به مردم اتحاد است زیرا که میدانم اتحاد رمز پیروزی ماست
And what do you mean by that you weren't part of it? Because you did join via video conference, at least, so you did send out your message. Tell us more about that in terms of why you wanted to get out your message then through this means or through this conference, and what it meant to you.
از من دعوت شده بود من نرفتم برای اینکه در
I was
جای دیگری
invited
بودم
to Munich.
امکان حضور
I did not
نداشتم
go
خواهش
because
کردم
I was
برگشت
somewhere else and did
پیام
not have the
دادم و
possibility to
هر
attend.
گروه دیگری
They asked me to send a
که از
message,
من
and I did.
دعوت بکنن و
And
حاضر
any other
باشن
group that
پیام به
invites
من
me and
تشکیل
is
بدن
willing to broadcast my
اعتقاد
message, I
همین
will
پیام
gladly
رو
give them
بهشون
the same
خواهم داد
message.
الان زمان
Now
این
is the
است که با
time for
هم
us to
متحد
unite
بشویم
and form a
ائتلاف
coalition.
بکنیم
For
دیگه
46
46 سالی
years,
که در
we've
حال
been
جنگیم
fighting amongst
ببینید
ourselves. You see,
در
in
این
these
46 سال
46
ثابته
years, it
نه
has been
صدها
proven
نفر
that
به تنهایی
neither monarchists
نه جمهوری
alone,
خواهان به
nor the
تنهایی
Republicans
نه
alone,
چپ ها به
nor the
تنهایی نه
left,
راست
nor
ها
the
به
right
تنهایی
alone, no
هیچ
group on
گروهی به
its own
تنهایی
can succeed
موفق
in
نمیشه
overthrowing the
که
government of
حکومت
Iran
ایران رو
and freeing
براندازه
us from
و در
tyranny.
شرق
We all
استقلال
must unite,
خلاص
hand in
بشه
hand, and
ما
work together.
همه بایستی با هم
And my
متحد
goal is not
دست
that
در
we
دست
should
هم
all think the same. The unity that I speak
کار
of
کنیم
is
و هدف
different
من این
from
نیست
the
که
unity of
همه
word that
متحد
Khomeini talked
باشیم
about.
اتحادی
What
که من
I
میگم
mean by
با
unity is that
وحدت
we
کلمه
become
به معنای
willing
درست
to
هم
work
درست
together while
منظور من
also
اتحاد
maintaining our own
این است که حاضر
political
باشیم با
preferences
هم
and
دیگه
beliefs.
کار
At the
بکنیم و
referendum, it will
سنگ
be
تعلیه
determined what the
سیاسی
future
خودمون
of
رو
Iran will be.
حفظ
But
کنیم
right now, we all have
آینده
one
ما رو
demand:
اون موقع
overthrow.
مشخص
So we
میشه
must join hands
آینده
to achieve
ایران
it.
چیست ولیکن الان همه ما یک خواست داریم با اون براندازیه پس برای براندازی بایستی دست در دست هم بذاریم
Thank you for your message. And you've also said that, quote, nothing useful and lasting can emerge from violence. But how can change come peacefully when the regime itself obviously survives through violence? I mean, every time Iranians take to the streets, and you've lived through this, whether it be in 2009, 2022, they've been met with bullets, with torture, with executions. Civil disobedience hasn't been enough. And even after the Israeli strikes, we haven't seen civil disobedience. Of course, repression is like it's never been before, but presumably, teachers, doctors, and such haven't been on strike. How can you assure the people of Iran that this time it's going to work if they go out into the streets, given what we're dealing with? What is your message to them?
کاملا حرف شما رو قبول دارم ببینید الان
I
روزی
completely agree
سه
with you.
نفر
Look,
حداقل
right
مرتکب
now, at
میشن
least 3 people
تعداد
are
دستگیرها
executed every single day.
خیلی
The
بالاست
number of arrests is extremely
به
high.
کوچکترین
For the smallest comment,
هر
even
جرم
a short social
کسی
media
رو
post,
میبریم
someone can be
اشتباه گرفتار
imprisoned.
میکنن
When a
یعنی
cherished
وقتی که
national
در حالی
treasure is sentenced to
استاد
prison just for
درجه
posting a
توی
dot,
کشور به خاطر
then
پستن
you can
یک
imagine
نقطه
what the situation of
حبس
freedom of expression in the country
محکوم میکنن
is.
به حبس
That's why I say this
که
government must
وضعیت
be
آزادی
overthrown
بیان
because there
رو در
is no other
کشور
solution.
حدس بزنید که چگونه است و به همین دلیله که من میگم این حکومت باید سرنگون بشه برای اینکه چاره ای نیست این حکومت هرچی بیشتر بماند بیشتر جنایت میکنه
The
این
longer
جنایت
this
ها
government
ما رو
remains,
به این
the more
به
crimes it
این
commits.
اعتقاد
These
راسخ
crimes
میرسونیم
bring us to the
که
firm
نقطه
conviction that an
پایانی برای این
end
جنایت
point
بایستی
must be
گذاشته
brought to these
میشود
crimes.
این نقطه
This
پایان
end point
سقوط
is the
رژیمه
downfall of the
به همین
regime.
دلیل
For
ما
this
در
reason,
راه جز
unfortunately, no path
براندازی باقی
remains
نمونده
except
ممکنه از
overthrow.
این داشته باشه
It may come at a cost, but the people have been left with no alternative. No path of reconciliation remains.
فقط یک نشانه نیست، نشانه های متعددی است.
Look, this is not just one sign, there are many signs. Iran has abundant oil, yet people live with at least 3 hours of power outages each day. The lakes have dried up, there is no water. This is not due to drought. We look at our neighbors, Qatar, the Emirates, Kuwait, those who are in worse conditions than us, yet none of them are suffering like we are, where people are forced to buy water.
دچار نشدن که مردمشون مجبور بشن آب رو بخرن. اقتصاد در مرز ورشکستگیه.
The economy is on the brink of a collapse. All of Iran's banks are bankrupt, surviving only by document fabrication and false accounting. The national currency loses value every single day. By the government's own statistics, about 1/3 of Iranians have fallen into poverty, though the real figure is higher. Housing and rent prices are so high that it is beyond the means of many people. Our top university graduates all dream of leaving the country, not because they don't love Iran, but because there is no work in Iran.
اما در ایران کار نیست. شما وقتی که سوار اسنپ یا تاکسی میشوید میبینید که
When you get into a snap car or a taxi, you find that the drivers are engineers or doctors because there is no work. They are forced to work as drivers. In such conditions, the government relies on violence, repression, executions, and prisons to try to silence people. Well, no way forward remains, no hope remains. All the signs show clearly that this government cannot continue. It thrashes about to delay its fall, but it can't hold on for much longer. Day by day, we are moving closer to the end of Islamic Republic.
روز به روز ما داریم به پایان جمهوری اسلامی نزدیک میشیم.
You've said women, minorities form the backbone of Iran's opposition. And you've lived through everything in modern Iranian history: revolution, reform, repression, and exile. Another war with Israel is likely looming. The E3 snapback sanctions are likely going to come in place. What's your message to Iranians bracing for more uncertainty, to young Iranians who may be disillusioned by revolution, by reform, and have been disappointed throughout the years? What is your message to them about why it's still worth fighting for change? What would you say to them with all this uncertainty looming?
پیام من برای مردم ایران و تمام گروه‌های سیاسی و کسانی که از شرایط موجود ناراضی هستند این است.
My message to the people of Iran, to all political groups, and to anyone dissatisfied with the current situation is this: if we unite hand in hand, we can achieve victory over the demon of tyranny that has coiled itself around Iran. What has allowed this regime to survive is divisions among Iranians themselves. But those divisions are starting to fade. I now see that inside Iran, different groups are beginning to work together. Outside the country, there are signs of solidarity as well, even if small. These must grow stronger. If we can become united, cohesive, and speak with one voice, then we can easily topple the Islamic Republic and bring to power the government of our choosing, under which we will finally be able to live a normal life. Because right now in Iran, nothing is normal.
در زیر سایه اون حکومت بتوانیم یک زندگی نرمال داشته باشیم. الان در ایران هیچی در حالت نرمال و طبیعی خودش نیست.
Thank you, Dr. Shirin Ebadi. It's been a true privilege speaking with you today. You can sign up for our weekly briefing newsletter at iranintl.com/newsletter. We deliver what you need to know with top stories, key analysis, and exclusive reports direct to your inbox. The Eye for Iran podcast series is brought to you by Iran International, your go-to destination for expert Iranian news in both Farsi and English. For more, you can head to our dedicated English website, iranintl.com/en.